So, this is why today we're just going to talk about fashion and fascism and its link, the way they like that, and they've been like that for way too long. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome if you're new. Welcome back if you're revenant. Please consider subscribing if you like everything and anything about fashion, critical thinking, and yapping. And today I'm back. We're going to talk about fashion and fascism and how the two are intertwined and have always been intertwined because it is not a new phenomenon. And ever since the Trump inauguration happened last week, I feel like that people, especially in the fashion realm, are all acting completely baffled and shocked at the fact that it was very obvious that fashion was also part of that fascism. And it got me thinking a lot because I kind of realized that the reason why people think that is that because people just don't know that fashion, it's not that people don't know, but it's just that the society, the system we live in, have managed to make us believe that fascism was behind us and we were in a new, completely different era when it's never really been the case. And fascism is just not like the fascism that was in the 20s and 30s and the fascism that we have now. Fascism has been something consistent since capitalism became a major thing, when the global north believed that they had a divine power to go and colonize and pillage the global south. And it's just that fascism is something that the global south have been going through since the beginning of capitalism. And it just, we've been shielded from that here in the West in a way. And it now is at a point where capitalism is becoming so unsustainable because capitalism has limits. You know, you can't actually live in a society where endless wars, pillaging, and like global disruption of the climate, of the living situations are you know completely limitless. For this first chapter, I want to remind people about the fact that the fashion industry and the ties to fascism is not new. I have a whole video talking about how the fashion industry is still part of colonialism and it's still kind of perpetuating colonial, you know, um, practices. And I think is because the way we've been taught to see fascism has been taught in a way that is very beneficial to the West, because like the West actually benefit from the fascism because the West is literally the father of fascism. Ever since it decided that colonialism would be its legacy, the West has been very much warped into the idea that fascism has to be part of its system. It just there was a time where uh, it considers that the 1920s and 1930s were a degenerative time where it went so far that it created atrocities that the West could not believe could happen on its own soil. Because let's not forget that it was in Western Europe, because Eastern Europe, atrocity has happened over there, but the Europe, like, and the West in general, likes to differentiate the West and the East. And so the atrocities that has happened in the Eastern European part has always been diminished and always been seen as less dramatic, rather than any atrocities happening here in the West, and it's something that still happens today. Like when something happens in the East, it's always kind of seen as not that much of a big deal. But you can have here in the West a church, a cathedral burning to the ground. Suddenly, the entire world has to be sorry for us. And the billionaire class is all out there, churning out money to get this cathedral repaired in less than 24 hours. So it's very important to understand that Eastern Europe and Western Europe have also like a dynamics that is really different. And especially as someone who grew up in Western Europe, and who has friend from Eastern European do face a lot of discrimination here in Western Europe, because Western Europe sees itself as superior to the rest of the world, even to their fellow Europeans. Just so we understand that. Um, but the way that we have been taught to see tragedies happening in the world is always kind of very geared towards who and where your empathy should lie, meaning that if it's something that happens here in Western Europe, you have to be reminded of it every day of your life, that this atrocity happened here and it was horrible. Yet the atrocities that the West committed that were like similar to even worse than the atrocities that may have happened here in the West are always kind of completely diminished or completely erased from history. Because first of all, like when the genocide happened here in the 30s and 40s in Western Europe, it was not the first genocide happening. Literally, the Mustache Man got inspired by the genocide that the United States committed towards its Indian population. That's how we got the inspiration. And the Mustache Man was the head of state of a country, of Germany, who was on his second genocide already. You know, it was not the first genocide. It was not its first rodeo. Its first rodeo with the genocide that it committed was kind of a test to see what they could do, how far they could go. Like a lot of the things that they then imported to the West was first tried on African people. And it's something, that I always like to remind people to be like, the reason why you need to be empathetic to other people's plight, whether they come from the same region as you or not, is because like the tactics that they are using over there are going to come back to us eventually. And it's already the case. The genocide that is happening in Palestine right now with all the AI and all those weaponry and surveillance, it's already coming back to us, just so you know. So everything is interlinked. But basically, I'm telling you that because there's this complete erasure of the fact that when slavery happened, the enslaved people were basically used as free labor, and they were picking one of the most used material and fabrics in fashion today, which is cotton. And it's always kind of baffling to me when I kind of think about the fact that, the fashion realm has always been very much embedded in fashion, in slavery and in fascism. When I think about all the times I've had studies on the subject, it was never described as a fascistic element, fascistic time. The only time that we talk about fascism is really about 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s Germany and Europe in general. That's the very few times where the term fascism is really applied. But when it comes to the slave trade, when it comes to the industrial revolution, it's never talked about in a way to be like, yeah, that was already fascism back then. And I'm talking about the Industrial Revolution because fascism is also about like which class is dominating another class. And the Industrial Revolution got the working class to be, working in factories for pennies with, yes, innovation. And that's something that we can agree to make, clothing, because the fashion, like the Industrial Revolution in the UK was mostly about the clothing aspect. But the thing is that the people seeing the reaping the benefit of this innovation were not the working people. It was not the people working in factories. It was actually the people running those factories, like, at the head of those factories. And it was still at a time also of heightened colonialism. So this is also why I kind of clumping in with fascism, because it was at a heightened time. Let's not forget the Silk Road. That was also a massive, massive thing during colonialism. Silk being also a fabric that is essential and highly used in fashion. So I think it's so important to really kind of see things through and to kind of, connect the dots and to remember that fascism and fashion have always have a link. I would even go as far as saying that fashion managed to give fascism a reason to thrive by coming with innovative tools, innovative engines and all that to make fashion production more efficient. And it's just that today, that innovation that has been, a landmark back then is still being used. And it's just that the whole thing about the fascism of back then, it's just that it's been kind of rearranged into another way, to the point that you don't really see that it's actually still colonialism, and colonialism is fascism. And I think it's something that I want people to understand. It's just that colonialism is fascism. There's no other way that you can describe colonialism but fascism, because it has all the components of fascism. But the thing is, we never describe colonialism as a fascistic element. The way we speak, the way we label things is also the way our world is shaped. And the reason why we have not seen colonialism as a fascistic element is because the way the West has described it to us is to kind of completely omit the fascistic aspect of colonialism. Because if there's something that the West does not want to admit, is the fact that the West has always been fascistic. But it does not want to admit that because the West has put itself on a pedestal as this beacon of truth, of democracy, of everything that is good for the world, when it's never been the case. And it's just that now it's blowing back into our faces because, like I said in the introduction of this video, that you can go so long with completely, pillaging and going overboard with the limits that the world is giving you. To understand that fashion has been a colonial element and a fascist element embedded in that colonialism and that fascism for so long, it also helps you understand that the delocalization of production, of fashion production in global south is a continuation of that fascism, because that idea that people in the global south are not as worthy as people in the West, to the point that it's best for fashion giants to go produce they goods over there for cheap, because like again, the the West likes to praise itself as this beacon of democracy and human rights, but when it comes to committing violation in the global South, they're going to do it. And this is again a legacy of fascism, and fascism is colonialism. So the moment you kind of understand that this being actually an element of our society for so long, it is not a surprise as to why the whole Trump inauguration, you've seen like brands such as Oscar de la Renta, Givenchy, and all that. It's not new. I think, people know that fashion and fascism have been kind of intertwined for some time, but I just found it like very funny how people were kind of surprised as to why Oscar de la Renta all of a sudden was okay to dress people from a fascist, or who has like either from a fascist government or has a link to a fascist, to the fascist government. And then it's also less surprising as to why the Arnault family, Arnault family, they own LVMH, one of the big fashion corporation in the world, why they were also present at the Trump inauguration. Because the moment you understand that fascism, fashion, capitalism are all interlinked, because it's always about making sure that the bigger heads and the bigger fortunes do get what they want, it's not surprising to see the fashion industry and fascism collaborating. It's not been overt for so long, so it was very much kind of hidden a little bit, or kind of done like behind closed door. But now that there's actually no reason to hide your fascism, they're just gonna show up. Because again, like if there's someone who knows that the empire is dying, is the ruling class, the oligarchy, the billionaires. They do know that the empire is falling, and the reason why they're going to come together this tightly, this quick, is because they're hoping to maintain the system the way it is, so it keeps benefiting them, because they know that the time is running out, and that's also how we should view the things, knowing that they're scared because they know it's actually almost to come to an end. But yeah, so it just does not make like it's not a complete surprise the moment you kind of understand that colonialism has always been fascism, and that fashion and it's tied to colonialism and it's tied to fascism, to fascism as a whole, like even fascism here in the West, is not something that is an anomaly, that is an odd thing. Then you understand why suddenly the fashion world has decided that it was time to have a complete mask off moment and to just like full on show where their values lie, because it has always been about making sure that they make a profit, they make as much money as possible, and not so much about the love of fashion in itself. It's just that there's a lot of money that can be made in fashion, and that's all they care about. And since money is power, the more money they have, the more power they gain. And it's always about making sure that this is remaining for them, even if it means to stab us, like the working people, in the back. In a neoliberal system where capitalism is literally their god and they need to worship it to no end, the whole goal of an industry is to make money. And fashion is an industry where you can make a lot of money, to the point that the reason why we have fast fashion that has risen so quickly and is like still doing so well today is because they do know that there are a lot of money that can be made in there, which also explains the lowering of the clothes quality, because it's quantity over quality. And since now you're aware that the West does not care about human rights, especially violating human rights if it means to make a profit. Since they produce majority of their clothes in the global south, and colonialism still being a thing, they just don't value the lives of those people there, so they just don't care. As long as they can make like a lot of clothes that they can then jack up the price when it comes here to sell to us, and pay those people pennies, in hope to make like billions in profit at the end of the year, they're going to do it. Because in a system that values competition, and maximizing profit, you can only see things in a way that is just money, you know, focused. When you see that in the fashion industry, we also have like mega corporations such as LVMH, such as Kering, and all of that, it's not surprising that the entire premise of those corporations is profit. And it means that it's always going to be doing things and making decisions in the idea of how can we make more money? How can we secure our position as a multi-billion company? Because at the end of the day, it's all about how can we also make sure that we have enough influence to sway democracy on our side, because it's always democracy for the few and not for the many. And I hope that a lot of you have kind of realized that democracy is not a thing anymore, because democracy has always, we have some element of democracy, and that's something that needs to be recognized and acknowledged. We do have some element of democracy, but we still are ruled by the oligarchy. So by ruled by people who have like a healthy amount of money, and who literally just make sure that they keep having a healthy amount of money. So the legislation, the laws, and all that usually are always made in a way so it goes in a way of the oligarchs. There's a reason why also like super wealthy people do give a lot of money in political campaigns and in politics in general. At first, we were sold this idea that it was, oh, they're just so generous. And I think more and more people are kind of realizing, being like, no, they're not being generous. They're trying to make sure that the money they're giving to the politician they're giving to is going to be on their side. So if they need something to be changed, this is going to happen, because at any time they can actually remove their funding and completely stop funding that politician. And I'm glad that more people are kind of now waking up to that and realizing that, yes, we have an oligarchy problem, and we've been having an oligarchy problem for a long time. I think like a few days ago, I've seen that in Australia, they now are limiting the amount of money that oligarchs can actually give to political parties, because yeah, that was getting a little too insane. I mean, look at the United States right now. Look at the United States and look at them. Like, there's 13 oligarchs in that government now, and just look at what Elon Musk is doing. Also, it's just completely insane. But yes, those fashion corporations are in for also the money. So I'm saying that because the Arnault family were present to the Trump inaugurations, and there's something that's been actually discussed a lot, is the way that in the first Trump term, the entire neoliberal sector, or entities, were firmly against the Trump administration. They were clearly calling him a fascist, a Nazi sympathizer, and all that. They were very, very, very clear about that. They were not on the side of Trump. 4 years of the Democrats and 4 years of just the world getting worse and worse, and the empire clearly declining. And 4 years later, suddenly the fashion industry and all other neoliberal entities don't have any issues with fascism suddenly. And they're even cozying up to fascism overtly, especially in times of empire declining, when the empire is coming to an end. We've been talking about the late stage capitalism for a very long time. So when an empire comes to an end, it's always going to be very, very scary for the people who benefited from that, especially the liberals who have always pretended to be like those tolerant leftist people, when it's never been that. It's just that they were the covert fascists, But the moment it comes to save the empire and their own interests, they're going to rise up and be like, okay, now let's just cause it up to, the people who are also going to fiercely make sure that the system is going our way. And that's why it's not really surprising. Like the other day, I also was reading an article which stated that Bernard Arnault, which is the CEO of LVMH, was now considering the US market more than the European/French market, because he was getting a French/European fatigue. And when I read the article, for me, it literally reeks this idea that now that we have an overt fascist government in the US, and the US being the beacon of capitalism and of human rights violation, it's now the time, if we want to make as much money as possible, to get into the market now. And this is what it screamed to me. It just screamed this idea that, okay, so the moment is now, before the fall of the empire. The moment is to go make as much money as we can, in the hope that the system is going to last as long as possible. But now the Americans are now allowing this fascistic element to really take place. So it's time to go there and to do that. Whereas here in Europe is getting very fascistic. Like, don't get me wrong, it's getting super fascistic, but it's the fascism here in Europe. I think it's because we also had the Nazi regime, the Mussolini, and the Franco. I think it's just Europe also is in kind of a weird limbo, I would say, in a way that it still has this memory of fascism and what fascism has done to it. But also, it does not have this memory that clearly, but it's never going to be as overtly, overt as the United States, even though it's starting to be, because I think the United States has completely kind of allowed the oligarch fascism to take place. That now, even here in Europe, they are very much cozying up to them, and even openly saying that we should actually follow up on the Trump administration and decision. Literally, I live in Switzerland, and literally, this is why kind of the Swiss CEOs were like, we actually need to, take notes on what Trump is doing, and they full on board with the Trump administration. You know, that kind of shift when you see that there's this it's becoming shameless. You understand we in a big mess. I mean, let's not forget that during the Nazi regime, it was a time where the economy was doing amazing. The economy was doing great, a bit too great, you know. And again, since we never really learned much of our past because it's not in the interest of the Western powers to do so. Because again, capitalism is having the West in a chokehold. Things are not really changing. For this third chapter, I want to give a couple of examples that just shows how the fascism has never really been defeated, but it was rebranded. And one of the examples that I love to give that is not, you know, fashion related, but one of the examples that I love to give is the fact that after World War II, they decided to create NATO, the North Atlantic or Transatlantic Organization. And this organization was created by Western powers. It was even like founded in 1949 in Washington, but it is not headquartered in Brussels. And it included the United States, France, the UK, obviously, and Denmark. And I don't know if Germany was also one of the first founders of NATO. But so, you know, NATO, for those who don't know, is this organization which basically creates treaties between 32 state members of military alliances. And for example, if a country, a NATO country is invaded, the other NATO members have an obligation to intervene. And so it was created after World War II. And what is always so funny to me, because, you know, when we grew up, NATO was actually sold to us as this kind of organization that was there to maintain peace, to make sure that peace was restored after what happened in Nazi Germany and in Italy, Mussolini, and to make sure that this never happens again. And the more I started to grow political consciousness, the more I kind of realized that, well, it's not true. NATO is just an organization to make sure that the United States have a foot in Western Europe and in Europe in general. Because, you know, what's happening in Ukraine is NATO-Russia proxy war. And I think now it's becoming more and more clear for the majority of the people. But at first, when this broke out, a lot of people really didn't know that it was NATO was involved in that. This NATO, you know, organization, the first ever Secretary General of NATO was Adolf Hitler. And if you've been interested a bit about the whole Nazi Germany history, where you really kind of really dig into it, you would know that Adolf Hitler was the chief general of the Nazi army. He was the one overseeing the Nazi army, meaning he was the one being closely tied to the mustache man. And this man, after World War II, was rehabilitated as a liberal and put at the head of NATO. And he's not the only Nazi that was rehabilitated. The NASA, you know, NASA. You all know what the NASA is. Well, the founders of NASA were Nazi as well. When we come to fashion, the things that, I want to point out when it comes to we never learned from our past. By the way, I wrote a whole Substack article about that you can find here, and then you can go and read about how we never learned from the past and why we never learned from the past. But in the fashion industry, I think something that always gets into my mind is the fact that, do you know the brand Hugo Boss? The German brand Hugo Boss that was created in the 1920s in Germany. Well, the founder, so Hugo, was a Nazi member. He was a member of the Nazi Party, but also he is the one who created the Nazi uniforms for the military, but also for the Nazi youth. It is actually quite well documented. Its link and its ties to Nazism and how close to that he was, to the point that he accepted to do that. And again, like I said, it's important to remember that also during the Nazi time, it was an economic boom that was also happening. So a lot of businesses could actually make a lot of money, and they really jump into it in order to do that. Like in my video about Adidas, and Bella Hadid situation that I did, like it was over the summer. In that video, I do talk about how basically Adidas, so the founder of Adidas, was also very close to the Nazi Party, and one of the reasons because he was part of the Nazi. He trained the Nazi youth, and there was this whole thing of getting into becoming a member of the Nazi Party in order to have like the benefits of having a successful brand. Well, the parallels are actually so blatant now, when I'm just like, yeah, this is why the LVMH wants to get more into the American market at this very moment, and why brands now are not pushing back against dressing these people, but even kind of have no issues with that, because they seeing that as an opportunity to make a lot of money, which also shows how capitalism will completely corrupt your morals, and completely just wipe everything away. Like if it's for a couple of dollars, like we can you can adhere to whatever fascistic thing you want. But the thing is, when you also think about it, like the Hugo Boss situation was revealed, and it took like years later, about like 60 to 70 years, for the brand to really be like, oopsie, yes, we're sorry. Yeah, effectively, we were like the brand and the founder were part of the Nazi Party and had like really close ties to the Nazi Party, to the point that they were even doing the SS uniforms for the military and the youth. But we're sorry for that. And then you look at the whole thing, and Hugo Boss is still doing great. You still see like influencers and celebrities being like endorsing that brand, and that brand's still doing amazing. And brand like fashion magazine and fashion people still talking about that brand, and even very rarely mentioning its ties to the Nazi Party, when honey, Hugo Boss was literally they were making the uniforms. The founder was a member of the party, and also another thing that I want to to show about the fact that how the fashion industry and colonialism and everything, the fascism is still like a continuation today. During that time as well, the Hugo Boss was using prison labor. The conditions were completely horrible. The hygiene was very to be desired. And I'm talking about that because prison labor, especially when you look at it in the context of the United States, is still a thing, you know? And it's not just in the fashion industry. Now it's like all the big corporations who are using prison labor. And prison labor is even used to save people from fires. Like when you look at the LA fires, the firefighters, majority of them, if not all of them, are actually inmates, you know? So, yeah, prison labor is still a thing. You see how things are, like, the more you pay attention to things, the more you kind of realize that things have not changed a bit. Even though we were told that things have completely, like, massively changed and we in a completely different era, it has not. It has not. And the more you pay close attention to it, the more you realize that, oh, okay, so we were lied to. Yes, basically that was the whole point of the Western apparatus, is to lie to our faces so it can keep doing what it's doing because it's beneficial to its ruling class. The other very well known but still least talk about fashion brand that was linked to, you know, a Nazism and fascism was Coco Chanel, Gabrielle Chanel. So there's even a book that was written on that, which is called Sleeping with the Enemy by Hal Vaughan. I read it but years ago, but I know it's called like Sleeping with the Enemy. And this book literally details how Coco Chanel was embedded in the Nazi military intelligence because she dated a Nazi officer who was in the intelligence. And so she also worked as a Nazi agent for the Nazis. And she did it like for two reasons. One was because her nephew was in prison and she wanted her nephew to be released. So it was one reason she did that. And the second one, which goes in the fact that, you know, fashion brands and their founders don't really have like principles, and people just embedded with fascism don't have principles in general. She also did it because it was giving her access to the high life, and she was living like in a very luxurious hotel, and she was, you know, cozying up with very important wealthy people. So she did not want to lose that. So she decided that she would just become a Nazi spy. But which is not surprising, knowing that she was also very close to Winston Churchill, you know, the former Prime Minister of the UK, and also the one who allowed the massacres and genocide of millions of Indians, you know, through a man-made famine. Yeah, she was close to she even considered him a friend. That's how close she was. And then she met this German officer who she dated for a while, and even like the hotel, I think it was the Hotel Paris Ritz that she was living in with her lover, and it was also, this hotel also doubled as a military base for the Nazis. But the thing is, of course, the moment that the Nazis were losing steam and they were basically kind of, you know, the empire was about to fall, she tried to distance herself. And by doing so, at some point, she fled to Switzerland, which is so funny as a Swiss citizen myself as well. It's so funny to see that because, like, especially with the recent event that happened over the weekend with the electronic intifada journalist Ali Abunima, who was arrested, literally abducted in the streets in Zurich this past weekend and stayed in prison for 2 days. Like, he is a Palestinian American journalist and also like anti-genocide activist, and he was like violently and brutally abducted and unlawfully imprisoned. Um, and at the same time, Davos thing was happening where the the Israeli president was literally welcomed almost on a red carpet. And it's always so funny for me to see that basically Switzerland has not really changed much either, because it would actually allow pro genocide people to come in, because, we're talking about Coco Chanel, pro genocide woman, because she was an informant and an agent for the Nazi regime, who then came to take refuge here in Switzerland. Yeah, but like, when Germany asked Switzerland also to bring them back all the Jews that fled to Switzerland, Switzerland did just that and send them back to their death camp. And it's always so funny how, like, because Switzerland like to play it like if nothing really happens here, and it's like this really cutesy country where people don't really, like, the history is just very basic. We never really take part into any conflict or anything. We neutral, and then you dig a little bit more and just realize that you're actually a naughty, disgusting country, are you? That's basically the whole story about Switzerland, is basically that. So when I remember when I was researching for this video, and I like stumbled upon this line that she fled to Switzerland to avoid prosecution in France, because France had actually regained the control of its territory after Nazi occupation, and so they were prosecuting people who were embedded with the Nazis. So she fled to Switzerland to avoid prosecution. But then eventually she went back to France, and she managed somehow to avoid getting prosecuted completely. And even what she did is that she made sure that the people who knew about her involvement in the Nazi regime would not air that out. And for example, she paid for some people's treatment and to make sure to support them financially. So eventually, the ones who would actually write memoirs and all that would not mention her in any pages or any history or stories, sorry, any stories about her involvement. And basically, Coco came back into the fashion side triumphant in 1954, I think it was. And it's like if people kind of completely forgot that girlie was actually part of the Nazi regime, and she made sure that it would not be known as that. And today, when you talk about Chanel, it's never the Nazi, involvement of its founder that is mentioned, even though, like, you know, like, she also did this for a business perspective, because she also knew that with the Nazi help, she could manage to grow her business and be really successful and make a lot of money. So that's also why she accepted to completely corrupt her morals in order to get successful with her brand. It's never been made a big issue to have fascism in the fashion sphere, and that's why now we're seeing those brands redoing, like repeating history, because I'm pretty sure that Oscar de la Renta or any brands part of LVMH in a few years time, when it's going to be uh like frowned upon to have been part of one of the most brutal and fascistic system in history, um, are going to just, send a couple of apologies, probably like a press release where they very apologetic about, yes, we were part of this fascistic system. We're sorry, and it go on by their day. I mean, look at Hugo Boss and Chanel. They have been barely impacted by that. Okay, guys, so that is it for this video. Please let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on the matter. I always love to read what are your thoughts on the matter. You can follow me on Instagram at Les Cool Girls. And you can also follow me on Substack, because I do write articles on Substack. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. This helps me a lot. Share around, the more people it reach, the better. And in the meantime, I'll see you in my next video. Love always.